Was Shakespeare an anarchist? No. Or maybe he was and just never really wrote about it. We have no idea. The Welsh anarchist novelist, pictured here, John Cooper Powys, seems to think he was. Many of his plays seem to support divine right, hereditary kingship in the end, and I'm not going to argue that they don't necessarily. Rather, I want to show how the early modern political culture, as exemplified by Shakespeare, just before the English Civil War, may have influenced the ideas of people like the Diggers, as seen there, and how ideas presented within his plays can be read as proto anarchist thought. So let's start with the historical context. Um, Shakespeare was born under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and a little over half of his plays were written by 1603, which was when she died. Tensions between the Catholics and the Protestants hadn't been great under Elizabeth, and this only grew under her successor, James I. James' son Charles, over there, was the one who started and then got executed in the English Civil War. James was very pro divine right of kings, as we saw in the reading from the True Law of Free Monarchies, had his life threatened by the famous gunpowder plot, and was pretty censor happy, especially in the theater. So you can imagine there was pressure on Shakespeare to stay away from themes of toppling kings. But Shakespeare was also living during a great shift in the nature of power sovereigns had over their subjects. The medieval king held power of life or death over their subjects, while the modern ruler subjugates their bodies, according to Foucault. Although James I believed strongly in this medieval form of power, the regular people were kind of shifting away from it. Enough that, I mean, in a couple decades, they killed the legitimate monarch, Charles. Shakespeare recognizes this shift, and so he explores the consequences of different forms of government in his writing through the lens of several different plays and settings. Is man meant to be a subject of a monarch or a republic? Is man even meant to be a subject? These questions, inherited from classical times, appear prominently in his plays set in ancient Athens and Rome. Moving on to the ancient world. Starting with Timon of Athens, not very well known play. Timon of Athens shuns society and views gold as the root of all evil, being a rich man at the beginning of the play and slowly becoming disillusioned by his leeching so called friends. He dies alone, a hermit in the woods. I don't think I have to explain why this play contains anarchist ideas, but I did anyway, as you can see there. Coriolanus, set in Republican Rome, features returned war hero Caius Marcius Coriolanus, who gets into office via his power-hungry mother and corrupt senators. Marcius is not a politician. He really only cares about himself. He's brutally honest in his disinterest in the plebeians who are starving. Although Rome was seen as the height of civilization by Renaissance humanists, you have to question a society with a voting class that's so corrupt, power hungry, and out of touch that it can elect someone like Mardius. Mardius betrays Rome to their enemy, Volscia, and then betrays Volscia again at the urging of his mother. And then the Volscians kill him. And in the end, he's home in neither Rome nor Volscia, the cast out product of a society that's used him for his own ends. I believe this discontent is unique among Shakespeare's Romans. In the end, he's not happy with any state. The play suggests that even Roman democracy wasn't that great at all. Politics is inherently corrupt. Also, the themes of popular discontent with the government in Coriolanus might have been inspired by the Midland revolts, which were against the enclosure movement, which, if you'll remember, was also what the Diggers were rebelling against. Shakespeare's criticism of governments extended into his English histories too, although they focus on royalty by necessity. Um, I think they also pose questions about leadership and whether monarchy itself is viable. So let's talk about Richard II. Richard II is about King Richard II of England. Richard is a firm believer in divine right, just like James and Charles. This play was written under Elizabeth, and so that wasn't quite as controversial yet. Um, its most famous speech, delivered by John of Gaunt, beginning with "This throne of kings, this sceptred isle," praises England as a piece of land, first of all, and then for its former paradise like qualities, primitivism, before the vices of kings infected it. To John of Gaunt, the king he's talking about is Richard II. To Gerard Winstanley, who echoed a lot of these same ideas in Barons, he's talking about Charles I and what he did. The most important connection here is that land belongs to the people and land creates the country rather than the king. It's definitely an idea that would be used by the diggers in a more popular sense. This idea is echoed again notably in Henry VI, Part 2, which is just as exciting as it sounds, with Jack Cade's rebellion. It contains the play's most famous line, "Let's kill all the lawyers." The rebellion is played mainly for comedy and ends up failing, but it can't be completely ignored. This is our only view of the lower classes in a play that, by its nature, focuses on King Henry VI and the court politics. Again, the land belongs to the common people, not to the lawyers or the nobles that they represent. Part 4, the comedies. As You Like It. In this pastoral play, the ideal world is presented as depending on interpersonal relationships, and the presence of a ruler doesn't seem to change the fact that there effectively is no government for most of the play. The ideal world is a reflection of what wasn't present in Elizabethan London: freedom, space, anarchy. It's full of roaming shepherds who live honestly, live off the land, and are not tied down by any government. And The Tempest. Caliban and Ariel, two spirits native to the island, serve Prospero, the exiled Duke of Milan, who's also a magician. The primitive, animalistic Caliban says he ruled the island before Prospero arrived. He was first his own king. Throughout the play, he's seeking to get rid of Prospero and return it to its previous state of nature. The island also inspires Prince's advisor Gonzalo, who washes up on shore for plot reasons, to imagine his fantasy utopia where all are equal. Men are idle, there's no crime, they just live off of nature. And you can see the speech on the screen as well. But as his companions point out, he has to imagine himself as king first to realize the project. And finally, King Lear. It's a tragedy because of its tone and because it doesn't claim to be a factual history in so much as any of Shakespeare's histories are really factual. And it doesn't claim a line of descendants that relate to the current monarch. This was definitely a very Jacobean play. Lear represents at once Shakespeare's most confusing and his most personal exploration of anarchism. Like with the comedies, most of this exploration comes from characters in a non natural state. I don't want to say supernatural, but it's removed from the normal, that everyday life. In King Lear, this unnatural state is represented by Lear's madness as he wanders the heath with his fool. The play returns to normal and political by the end, with a legitimate reign assuring England's continued existence. But, as I think is also true with the comedies, the revelations in the middle make up the greatest effect of the play, what you take with you once you've left. Not only does the very setting of the heath represent uncivilized nature, but Lear's thoughts after abdicating his throne verge on anarchic. On the heath, everything is topsy-turvy. The fool is wise, the noble Edgar pretends to be a mad beggar, and the former king wonders what the point of having kings or even a country is. In a quote from Barker, the play is emptily populated with people who are not themselves and who are displaced. Lear begins Act 3, Scene 2 by tearing up a map of the country, literally dissolving the realm. Later, he speaks of himself as an unaccommodated man, at once belonging nowhere and realizing it's his own fault for allowing himself to end up like this. And Lear's dispossession is the result of his former sovereignty over the land, something that will inherently cause dispossession of his subjects. In another quote from Barker, although we never really see these subjects, the play is haunted by their imagined voices, which trouble the anxious imagination of early modern power. In conclusion, at first sight, Shakespeare may appear to only be concerned with the aristocracy, who, in accordance with Aristotle's principles of tragedy, are the heroes of almost all his plays. But he was living at a time of political unease and questioning about the future. I argue that Shakespeare's focus on the figureheads isn't just snobbery or convention, it's dialing into the figures that ordinary people were examining for the signs of things to come. Throughout his plays, he's constantly grappling with what is necessary to make a state, and in doing so, explores the idea of statelessness altogether in some very interesting ways. And the works cited. I didn't split up each. I just cited the my complete works because if I cited every single play, I would need a second slide. And yeah, so there you go. This has been my presentation.